This scene then, which I provided with Bryce 7.0 as a example scene using a volumetric cloud material effect, I'm going to use to add a special effect. That is the idea that you can create the illusion of rays being streaming through a gap in the clouds and illuminating part of the scene. And to do this, I'm going to set the scene up. It's going to be a little bit fiddly getting the effect right, so because the volumetric clouds take a while to render, and they will take even longer when they're finished fiddling with them, the first thing I'm going to do is get hold of the volumetric cloud slab, which is here from the overhead view, go to the attributes and hide it. And what I also notice here is I've got a fill light that's just providing a bit of bluish light on the side of the train. I'm going to get rid of that, and so we're only got the sun in the scene, and now I've hidden the clouds, it'll render a lot faster. So I know that the clouds come round in an arc like there, and so what I'm going to aim to do is get the light streaming down here somewhere, and to do that I'm going to apply it on a cone. So if I just create a cone which has been made in this scene somewhere, it's looking quite small, so I'll enlarge it. There you go, the cone's a bit bigger now, we're looking down from above, and there's the camera there. I'm going to position it in the scene, and I'm going to tilt it over, rotate it, enlarge it, and try and get it roughly where I want this effect to be. And I can use two ways. I can use world space to change its orientation, and object space, but if I'm going to change the shape of the object I better use object space so I can make it taller, and it's spreading out a bit too much at the moment I think, so I'll need to go back into world space. So it's just knowing how to manipulate objects really to get them more or less where I want them. So we'll have a look how that looks in the scene. Okay, it's touching the land there a bit too much for my tastes, so we're in world space at the moment, so I could try rotating it and moving it and rotating it again so it's coming more straight down and not hitting the land. It's coming behind that headland, so I think I want it in front of this headland, so I'll just try moving it forward a bit. What I'm aiming for is essentially to get the effect in the sea as far as possible, because if it's going to clip the land it might look a bit odd, but we could try moving it once we've got the effect going. So this is going to be my effect. Now you'll notice I've not put the point of the cone where the sun is, and that's because the light's streaming through the cloud, so what I actually want is the effect to start here and for the tip of the cone to go missing. So if I start editing the material on this, so go into the material lab, what I'm going to need is something that creates the effect, something that allows me to take the end of the cone off, and to do that I'm going to use 3 channels, and it's going to be based on the transparency. The effect's not going to need to cast shadows, receive shadows, or self shadow. I can use blend transparency, so as you can see that'll make it more or less visible. If I set the diffuse colour to white and then it's sort of semi-transparent, it's going to allow you to see behind it. And the first thing I'm going to use in the transparency channel is going to determine where you see the ray effect. The next one's going to be nothing at all, and the third one's going to be an altitude filter that's based on the object that allows me to clip the end of the cone off. So I should prepare it. If I look a preview for a cone here, it's in here somewhere. Right, so that represents the cone in my scene. If I go into the diffuse channel to start with, setting my effects up, and hold the shift key down and go to the material made in one of the other tutorials, this rainbow texture, then I'll position it so we're looking above, and there's a shadow region there. It's not going to help me. See, I can make it more transparent, I can see through that shadow. Switch to spherical mapping and set this down to 10%, which if you remember from the previous tutorial allows it to go one cycle completely through a rainbow. Now what I'm looking to avoid in this effect is any tear in the material effect, and so I need to know where the join is, where it starts spherical mapping and stopping. Now I don't know where that is just yet, so if I go in here and I reduce the scale of that to 6%, you can see now the tear is there in the pattern. So I'll position that so it's straight up so I know where it is, and go back to 10%, and I can see that it's in the between the green and the blue part of the spectrum, or in other words it's opposite the red part of the spectrum. Well, if I go into the deep texture editor and I just consider that it's opposite the red part of the spectrum, so it's opposite where the red is. Let's look at what the alpha channel's doing in the red part here. So it's black in the red part. So if we take the bit of the alpha channel where it's white away from whatever material that we're mapping around, we can hide the bit where the tear is. So if I move this into here and subtract, whatever I put in here now at this scale, it'll hide the effect. So if I put in random linear we'll go for, because that's going to make some lines, and if I increase the octaves it'll soften the transition and then increase the frequency there. I don't know how this is going to look. You can see we've got bands and then black and bands and then black. So somewhere in this black area, because we've subtracted out the bit where the join is, will be the join. So we know that there's not going to be any ugly joins in this. So if we now go to transparency and have the transparency controlled, it's invisible where the join is. And we've got this other effect here where we've got these lines. So if I put the diffuse under the control of white and then exit, we shall now have the hidden transition. And then the other thing we can do is then we can rotate this cone around so that it's not got a hard edge, because obviously if we can position it correctly, then it'll be fading out because of the subtraction of the red layer, if you like. So if I go into object space, I can rotate the object around. I'm just trying to preview it in here to try and rotate it so that it's got a soft edge at each end and it's not got that harsh transition. So it's actually softened towards the edges of the cone, and it's hiding the fact that I've put it on a cone that's got quite a solid edge. If we use other effects like fuzzy or volumetric, it's going to really, have a serious impact on the render time. So at the moment that's a bit too far away from the camera, so I'll try moving it closer to the camera and see what effect it has. So I've moved it in a bit, still quite far away. I'll move it in a bit further. It's appeared quite high up now, so I'll have to lower the cone down. So I'll lower the cone down, move it across, see if I can get it where I want it to be. Okay, so there you can see the issue with it meeting with the ground surface there. This is the bit we want to hide. At the moment, obviously, the bit that's transparent is towards us and the bit that's lit is away. So if we could rotate it right round 180 degrees, the effect comes towards us. So if one choice we've got is to move it right towards us. I could shrink the cone down now because it's getting quite unwieldy in size, and try and get the effect to slide right off in front of us, so we don't see the fact that it's hitting the water, or try to put it so that it's positioned behind something. So this now is just a matter of manipulating the objects you've got in the scene to try and hide the fight. Actually, just there it doesn't look too bad, though it's slightly smaller than I would have wanted it to be. So you could always use object space and then shorten the cone so the rays spread out more, like so. So as I said, one of the other things to consider in this situation, and always make it so more transparent so it looks less dramatic, is the clipping off of the cone there. So we go into materials now, and I'll hold Control key down and select channel C, and that'll put something in channel B and C. Under this channel, what I'm going to select is go to basic here and select basic altitude, and in this texture I'm going to just produce nothing. So if I choose a very simple texture to start with, and then edit this component, switch off one of the channels and go into this and select nothing, it's an alpha output of nothing we want. So if I go into sine control here, and it's already set it right down, so you can set it up so it produces alpha output to 100% or nothing there. So we've got a nothing output, which will mean that it's transparent at that point. And then if this is object space mapped, then I can use the altitude control. I can sharpen the transition between nothing and something and move it up and down with this offset. So that allows me to clip off the end of the cone, and then if the more I clip off or the less I clip off will make it seem like where the effect is starting, and the aim is to try and make it look like the effect is going to start in the clouds. I don't need to modify that, I don't know why I went in there. I can do it all through this control here. So increase this number here, scaling number, frequency number, and I can increase the sharpness of the transition, and then use the offset to move the transparent bit up and down on the cone. So I want that to go further up, so I use the offset here just to set it down because it's an offset, so making that more negative will move it up the cone towards the tip of the cone there. So now I've got my effect of the streaming light, and I want to put my clouds back in. So I'll just zoom out, because the cloud slab in this scene is quite tall, but it's going to be taller, but what I don't want it to do is interfere with this other effect, because there could be a collision between the object and the volumetric. So I'll select the volumetric slab and lift it up so it's above the effect, and then I'll go to the attributes and unhide it, and now have a quick render. Obviously the render time's gone up now, so I've got my streaming light effect. This is where the sun is. This is a bit dark here because I've taken out that fill light, but that's going to allow it to render a little bit faster. And the other thing I could do is I could increase the height of this. I don't know how much I can get away with, and that's going to increase the head of the cloud, so it could make the effect look a bit more dramatic of the sun peeping through this gap here, and then this streaming light effect. If I felt that effect was a bit too extreme, then I go into the material here, and I could just set the transparency a little bit down a bit, and then it'll not be as strong an effect, and so it's just a little bit less dramatic than it was. Obviously that's a matter of personal preference, so if you want it more dramatic, then you know, have it fully controlled by the alpha channel. And you see there's a slight tearing going on here. This is because of a very wide field of view that we've got, and a problem with the way the volumetric materials are mapped. This will always appear above the viewer, so if you want to overcome that, depending how straight up you're looking, then it'll depend on what quality you need. So if you increase the quality, that'll increase the render time, but it'll also improve the appearance of the cloud as it gets up in very high field of view shots. So you can see now more detail in the cloud. So if I give this a render now, I've got my effect in there. That says it's going to take 8 minutes 46, and it could possibly take longer than that, because in regular mode you have the AA pass. So if we go into the render options, we can change the AA tolerance, and this means that the AA will be less stringent. So if I change this up to 55, for example, then the AA pass is going to be a bit faster, but there will be a little bit more noise in the image, but it'll get over the clouds faster. So you can see the render times, I don't know, between 10 and 7 minutes, it's guessing. So at this point, what I'll do is I'm going to pause the video, and then we can see what it's like when it's finished rendering out. Well, that's okay, that's the finished render. It didn't take that long, so it was quite okay in its estimation of the time it was going to take. And we've got this effect, but you might notice here there's a bit of a line where the effect's hitting the sea, and I did say I wanted the effect in front of this headland, and it ended up behind. So what I could do now is refine the effect by modifying the material so it fades out when it hits the sea, or where it hits the sea. And to do this, it's going to be a little bit fiddly, so I'm going to hide the volumetric cloud so I can preview things quickly again. Go into the cone, go into the material. Right, what we can do is try and create it so that it fades out at the bottom as well as fading out at the top. And to do this, we're going to need another altitude filter, so we can create a band where it appears and disappears. So if I go into the altitude, and we just consider the alpha channel we're producing, now it's mixing so that the white channel here is going to be where the invisible one is, and I can test this. If I go to sine and just turn it up so it's generating full white, then we see nothing because it's selected the nothing channel. So white is where it's selecting nothing. So if we need white at either end and a black channel in the middle to select the effect, So if I just exit out of that and go back in, because I select the cross, it'll restore me to where I was, and then I'll go back and go for the alpha. So I need this black band in the middle somewhere, so somehow I've got to combine these. So if I average them, if I now change this, I'm going to try and position it so that I've got a black band. So change the filter around, if I can remember how to do it, so it's producing a negative effect, and then you can see I can create a band, and now average is going to make that grey, so add them, and then I've got a black band, so that means it's going to fade out above and fade out below. If I'd added those two together now, so it should be possible. You can see now we've got an area that's denser in the middle, but it's not full density. So if I had a final filter here, we can use smooth clip to increase the rate at which it goes to full density, and that'll give me a very defined area. Now in the scene I don't know where this area is going to occur, I only know where the top of it is because I'd organised that. So have a look at the scene now. You can see it cuts off more sharply, but it's still hitting the ground there. So I'll have to modify this material now bit by bit. So maybe I did with too sharp a transition, so I could always go back to none and see how that looks. So it might benefit from, oh, you see that's not enough of a transition now, it's not cutting out at the top. So you can see this is a bit fiddly to set up, which is why I left it for the last bit. So we'll try a bit of a transition there. So we've got a bit more that's continuing on because it's a stronger effect. So sharpen that still further so it's cut out the top. There we go. And now I have to start making it retreat by lifting this bottom section up. So if I find the way of lifting it, I can narrow the band of the effect now, and that's causing it to retreat down, and it's no longer clipping the ground. But the angle we're viewing at, if we go to object space and make sure I can rotate it, will affect how it looks because of the position of the cone. So if we want to stretch this out now, we can lengthen the cone, and that'll bring it down to the surface, and likewise lift it up, and that'll cause the effect to move. But at the moment it's not looking right because the idea was to get it closer to the camera. So if I get it closer to the camera now, and I can see a bit of it in the preview, I can try shifting this effect around and modifying it so that it's appearing in the right place. But it is not the easiest thing to do, I admit. So I'm shortening it, so let's have a look. Okay, right, we've got it in front, but it's still hitting the water, so I'll shorten it still further. Right, the effect runs out now, but it's stopping. What I could do with is it's stopping when it's reached its horizontal stage, which might mean world space mapping, which is going to change its position considerably now. So I'll try it with world space, and I'll widen this gap by lowering that down. That's a bit sharper transition. I don't want it that sharp when it's reaching the ground, so I'll fade it out more gently, then use the offset here to move it up and down. I can change the thickness of the effect by reducing this Y value. So again, it's just manipulating the scale of the effect, and then it's gone completely lost in this scene. So that's because it's changed its position. So I'll lift it up and try and get it into the scene, so I can get an estimation of where it's going to be. Because now with world space map, it's going to change its behaviour according to its total altitude, so it might be difficult to find. So I might, if I switch to actual selection, see I can't see anything of it in the scene here, so I'm going to have to scale it up and down. Don't know where it's going to be. Try different settings and hopefully it'll appear at some point. This is going to be a bit awkward, this. Let's see if I can get it to hove into view. Not really seeing it now at all. Oh no, I saw a bit of something there. Here we go. A tiny bit of something's there. There we go. The transition's quite thin, that's why we're having trouble finding it on this world scale. So I'm going to have to keep positioning it and lowering. If I make it a very low density on the y-axis there, I should be able to have, they're quite a big effect. So right now it's dependent on its altitude, so what I want to do is creep it down to ground level, but so it's just missing the sea. So I'm creeping it down, hopefully it's just missing the sea. That's crept it down a bit, but it's still above the sea, so that's taking it down further. So let's see, minus 14. I should have guessed it would be around that way because the sea's more or less at sea level. And the end's getting cut off because it's the end of the cone there, so we can lengthen the cone. But now it's linked to world space. Lifting it up and down is not going to affect the height of the effect. That's the difficult bit to set up. Once you've done that, if I set this at 0, or very close to 0, that should bring it almost down to the sea without touching the sea. There. So you can see it's touching the land there, and I want to avoid that, so I'll bring the effect across and down. Oh no, that's the volumetric cloud. Don't want to do that. I want to keep the volumetric cloud out of the way. Got hold of the wrong thing there. So there we've got it, so it's fading out underneath, but the cone is got very large now, so I'll bring the point down to where it was before, spreading out nicely. So you can see it's now the top of the cone we need to get rid of. So this can be done either through this by lowering the altitude filter till it clips the other one off. If I can sharpen the effect, I've gone too far negative there. If I can sharpen the effect, I can really control the clip off point. So let's see where that's taken us. Oh, very low. So I'll lift that up a bit, but not too much. See if that's bringing us closer to where the clouds appear in the scene. Okay, right, and that's a bit too high, so I'll crimp that in there. So now we've got this effect, it's a bit too dense, so I could try reducing the transparency still further, so it's letting more light through, but that's clipping more off at the end, so that might not be so good. The other thing is to modify this channel and make the effect more transparent by introducing more clipping. So we smooth clip this and then work out which is making it more transparent by applying more black, then it'll make the effect denser. Well, that's a bit too extreme. Go back in here, reset, make it slightly less dense, so that's still quite an extreme effect. I suppose we could try using additive and then reducing the diffuse value. That should soften the effect as well and create a different quality to the lighting effect there. So now we've got that. I'm going to move that across to the side a bit so it's more evenly balanced. So there, we're streaming out now, and it's not coinciding with the ground, so you can't see it's obviously on a cone and it's not going into the sun. Obviously that's a lot more difficult to set up, but hopefully we'll get the slab back in place, unhide it. Having gone to the trouble now, we can render it and it'll be a better effect without the problems of the somewhat or easier way of doing it, or rather a lot easier way of doing it. Right, I'll stop this here and let it render. Well, it says it's going to take about 20 minutes. That then is the final render. It took slightly over 20 minutes to complete. The pass was quite laborious over the water surface here, which as you can see is quite detailed. The effect turned out rather more dramatic than I had hoped it would, but it sort of illustrates the process necessary to set out these fading transition zones. But considering how fiddly it was, I just thought I'd recap. I've set up this material on this sphere, if we just look how it renders, with the basic altitude that you can find in the basic texture components there. The scaling's 20% and it's on world space, and I can illustrate how this works by copy and pasting this, and if I just reset this to its default size and drop it down and then we render, we can see that because it's on the world space altitude, what it looks like is dependent on its position in space. So if I lift it up to the top, it will be what it's like at the very top of that transition zone. Now if I copy and paste this again and change the material mapping mode into object space, now what we get here is dependent on the object's altitude, so I have to scale this up so I can see the effect occurring. At about 200 it's got about a medium transition, and because it's object space mapped, it's entirely on down to the object's own internal altitude. And also what you find is if you rotate the object, that's one of the poles, then you should see that the mapping mode rotates with it, so you can actually turn it around sideways and over. Another result of doing this video was I noticed while I was setting things up that if you set it to spherical, altitude doesn't map spherically, it actually operates a bit like object space. So, and that's not affected by altitude like object space, but the scaling is different, so it would be possible to blend the an object space altitude with a world space altitude on a spherical mapped object, as well as on an object space object mapped object. So all these different combinations give you a lot of variation in the kind of effects you can create. But as with anything with these, when you're setting things up here with the scaling factors and then having to go into the deep texture editor to make modifications here with the graphs, it can be quite difficult to get a sense of what effect your changes are having on what you're seeing in the scene, which is why it took me so long to set things up. So, well with that example and the final render, that's the end of the video. I hope you found that interesting and instructional.